Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of RE192, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is a completion of a 4-part series, A Human Nursemaid. Written by Chimpanzee Writes. There will be a playlist with the 4 videos in the description down below. Anyways, on to the conclusion. Miss Flo, can you hear me, Miss Flo? Florence opened her eyes, only to shut them again. It was too bright, a clean, white light. She moved to wipe her eyes, but pain exploded in her right arm. Instinctively, she reached to clutch her right arm with her left and winced at the pain. Blinking profusely, Florence forced her eyes open. Her arm was bound in a sling. Good, you're awake, her voice said. Florence looked up to see a young human doctor standing beside the bed. He continued, I'm going to need to ask you not to move around too much. You took a lot of damage getting to us, and I don't want you to exacerbate any of your injuries. How are you feeling? Florence looked around at the stark white hospital room with its minimal aesthetic and open curtains letting in a bright natural light before glancing down at her own body. She was clean and wearing a hospital gown. Someone had undressed and bathed her. Where feelings of having her privacy violated without her consent should have been, there was something else that she wasn't feeling that was more impressing. Leaning forward, she placed her hand where her thigh should be and instead felt a hard bulge under the blanket. In a panic, she started patting down the bed where her left leg should be, when she realized the bulge was her leg. She couldn't feel her hand touching her leg. My legs, she said worriedly, looking up at the doctor. I can't feel my legs. The doctor avoided her gaze for a moment, but quickly looked back with a firm but compassionate look at his face. At some point during your fight, you were struck by a bullet in your side, and it separated your spinal column just above L1 in your lower back. He said the words matter-of-factly. It brokered no disagreement or questioning. It was simply what happened. Okay, Florence said, swallowing her stomach back down. You can fix that kind of stuff, right? We're in a hospital. The doctor's firm but compassionate face didn't change, and his matter-of-fact voice returned. Normally, yes, this is something that we could fix. However, our nerve specialist surgeon didn't make it to the hospital. She was the only one who knew the operation. The slight catch in his voice when he said the surgeon didn't make it to the hospital spoke volumes. The surgeon that the doctor referred to in the past tense wasn't the only one who hadn't made it to the hospital. Florence's heart nearly stopped in a panic. The kids, she said with a start. The ones I came in with. There's 2 of them. They're both cognac. Where are they? Are they okay? Calm down, the doctor said, putting a hand on her shoulder. They're a little worse for wear, but they're all right. We found another cognac who was willing to take care of them. That was a very brave thing you did, watching over them. But you don't have to worry about them anymore. You don't understand, she said, throwing off his hand. Those kids are my responsibility. I'm their nursemaid. I'm all they have left. She needed to find them, and no doctor was going to stand in her way. She swung her legs over to the side of the bed and stood to barge out of the room. Except she didn't. Her legs didn't work. It had slipped from her mind. Her stomach tied itself in knots. She felt like she was going to throw up. Taking a deep breath, she recomposed herself. Could you please find them for me, she said, forcing her voice to be steady to a fault. I need to see them and make sure they're safe. The doctor's lips pursed together until they weren't much more than a line. Turning, he stepped into the hallway and grabbed a nurse. There were a lot of people walking by in the hallway, most of them human. Feck was home to millions of xeno workers, and humans were a very small minority of that. It was odd to Florence that they would make up such a large majority of those who made it to the hospital. So, the doctor said, returning to the hallway with a concerned look at his face, you're assuming guardianship over the 2 cognac children. Florence gave a firm nod. She had to keep Hector and Millie safe, whatever it took. All right. Well, we're planning on sending them off-world, the doctor said. Florence shot up. Can you really do that? Now wait a moment, the doctor said, tempering his tone. You need to understand that you won't be going with them. You're too injured to be moved. A pit gelled into existence deep in Florence's stomach. She couldn't let Millie and Hector go without her. could she? Where off-world are you going to send them? She asked hesitantly. She needed a lot more information if she was going to let Millie and Hector go anywhere without her. There's a small human corvette in orbit right now, the doctor started. They've deployed their entire contingent of surface-to-orbit ships to Xeno hospitals around the world. They're trying to save as many as they can, but we're just too many. Their life support systems are already strained to handle the added load. There's only one more group from this hospital that's going to be allowed to go, and I was hoping to have those 2 cardiac children you've brought on the shuttle. Florence could hardly process the information. It was a wildest dream and worst nightmare coming true at the same time. She sputtered. How long do I have to decide? They're finishing the final preparations on the shuttle right now. They should be launching within an hour. Okay, Florence said. Her mind was racing. Can I at least see them first, before I decide? The doctor nodded and went to fetch the children. Florence sat, swimming in a sea of turbulent emotions. Tears welled up in her eyes, and more than once she tried to wipe them away, only to have her right arm send bolts of pain through her body. Scolding herself, she tried to force her emotions down. She had to be strong for Millie and for Hector. Florence spent the next few minutes taking in deep breaths and trying not to think about the decision that in her heart she knew she had already made. Feeling like she had a pretty good handle on her emotions, Florence readied herself when she heard a baby crying in the hallway. Millie. She would recognize that cry anywhere. Moments later, Hector came barreling into the room, screaming her name as he jumped up onto the hospital bed. A Corniac man carrying a screaming Millie came in moments later. Despite her great efforts, Florence burst into tears from the overwhelming joy and deep sadness of seeing Hector and Millie again. Seeing them for the last time. Getting Hector to slide over, she gestured for the Corniac man to bring Millie to her. Millie was screaming and hollering enough to wake the dead, but as soon as Florence had her in her arms, she sang her a short lullaby. Just like that, Millie stopped crying and smiled up at Florence. Hector, Florence said, cutting in before Hector could launch into a series of frantic questions. I need you to listen to me carefully. She gestured to the Corniac before continuing. This man is going to take care of you, okay? He's going to take you on a big cool human ship where you'll be safe. Are you coming? Hector asked. The doctor says that I'm too sick to leave, which is why I need you to listen to me very carefully, Florence said. Putting a firm but tender voice, she continued, I want you to tell everyone, literally everyone that you meet, your full name, Millie's full name, and that your father is the Corniac ambassador to Cornia. Pico Catal, do you understand? Hector nodded vigorously, but Florence knew his penchant to say that he would do things when he really wouldn't, and this was too important to leave up to chance. She had him repeat it back to her several times, both what she wanted him to do and the exact words that he was going to tell people. She also made sure the Corniac man taking them knew as well. Are those kids in here? A woman said, popping her head into the room. The shuttle is about to leave. Florence nodded. Tears burned in her heart as though being ripped out. She kissed both Millie and Hector goodbye, handing Millie back to the Corniac. Florence could hardly handle hearing the sound of Millie starting to cry again now that she wasn't holding her. Hector gave her one last big hug, then got off the bed. Sitting there, unable to move, she watched them leave. Florence was alone. Pico Catal stood in the wings of the assembly, reading and rereading his speech in his hands. He worked so hard for this moment, putting in every favor and spending every bit of political capital he gained over the years of public service. It was time to start repaying a debt that could never be paid. Hector, Abigail, he said to his son and the new nursemaid holding his infant daughter. Are you ready? Abigail's nod was as graceful as Hector's was determined. Pico smiled and nodded back to his son, then turned and headed onto the stage, trying not to look overhead. He walked up to the podium, looking to either side to make sure that Hector and Abigail had followed him out. The crowd in front of him numbered in the millions. Cameras and news crews from 100 worlds were there and ready to film what he had to say. He cleared his throat and began. Over a year ago, the worst xenocide in generations took place in Gornia. It was an utter failure that resulted in the deaths of my wife, Decca, my sons Atto and Yakto, and my daughter, Yota, and countless others. It was my failure. It was everyone's failure. But I was the Corniac ambassador to this planet, and I failed to prevent the xenocide. However, where I failed, others triumphed. Thousands risked their lives for each other, including Gornians that sheltered Xenos from those hostile to them. Captain RE192 violated interplanetary law, bringing her corvette against Gornian ships to save those in danger. Her soldiers gave their lives on Gornia, protecting Xeno strongholds while they waited in vain for help that would not reach them in time. Never again. That single ship saved 10,000 lives, including those of my 2 children here. This is a tragedy of the highest order and could have been prevented. And from now on, it will be. Pico Catal gestured upwards to the mammoth vessel hanging motionless in the sky. Today marks an inaugural flight of the first Guardian-class ship, a joint venture between the Corniac and human governments. This ship will have the full backing of both combined navies, while still operating independently of any species' government. It will respond to any and all threats of xenocide that may occur. It boasts a full suite of hospitals, a dozen companies of volunteer soldiers, and thousands of surface-to-orbit shuttles. It has everything that was needed at Gornia, but wasn't there. Wiping a tear from his eye, Pico continued. This ship is dedicated to and named after an extremely remarkable individual who's sacrificed everything to keep others safe. People from a world different from her own. People from my world. Her name was Florence Sinclair. She was a human nursemaid, and she saved the lives of my 2 children, Millie and Hector, even at the cost of her own life. I owe her everything I have. It would be impossible for me to repay her for what she has done, but I will, at the very least, make sure that she is remembered and honored. Pico gripped the podium with both hands, staring defiantly at the crowd. So, I am sending this message out to everyone in the galaxy. This ship is large enough to be seen from the surface of every habitable planet. If you are afraid or scared for your well-being because of who you are, I want you to look up at the night sky, to that bright new star, and know that you will be all right. Because from now on, and until the danger is gone, you are under Florence's guardianship, and you will be kept safe, whatever it takes. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.